Welcome to the 7 Investing Podcast. I am Dan Kline, and I'm being joined today by Anirban Mahanti. Anirban, how are you doing this morning? Very early morning for you.
I'm fantastic, Dan. Nice to chat to you in the morning.
Have you had your Vegemite? Have you done all of the very limited things Americans know about Australians? I feel like we're probably going to get over this eventually, but it is really interesting to us that it's a different time of day. I don't know. We've been very fascinated by this, but thank you for getting up before you've even driven your child to school today. But this started on our Slack channel. So I sort of posted that I was kind of underwhelmed by the Apple press event from a couple of days ago. This is usually true of their spring event. The fall event is when they have their whiz-bang stuff, but you liked some of it more than I did. Why don't you give me the 10,000 foot overview, and then we will get into sort of going through each of the things they introduced and kind of what it means for Apple.
Yeah, so, I sort of find it interesting. You found it underwhelming. I actually thought it was probably one of their best events that came out in the recorded version, right? This, I think, is the third or the fourth recorded version. So it was really polished, really well done. They packed a lot of stuff in it. And sometimes what I find is exciting is not brand new things, but sort of the incremental innovation that comes with things. So, so they basically introduced a new iMac. They introduced new iPads. They introduced a new thing called AirTags, which I'm going to talk about in a bit. And that's really, and a few services things, right? So they talked a little bit about Apple TV. They talked a little bit about, what's going on with Apple Card. And they talked a little bit about podcast subscriptions. So I think it had an entire gamut of things. What really jumps out to me at a high level is sort of this, the Apple's Plays ecosystem, right? And it wants more and more people to use more and more things in the ecosystem. And in a sort of feedback loop that strengthens the ecosystem, makes better apps, better experiences, which brings more people into the ecosystem. So that's Apple's Play. And this was Apple's Play at top-notch Apple Play in full view. Again, it will not be apparent immediately. I think it'll be exciting or sexy, as they would say. But I think, over the long run, this is going to make a difference.
So it's worth noting that we're both Apple people. We are both on MacBooks. When we first started taping this, you tried to do it on an iPad. I own an iPad. I don't use it very often. I find that the latest iPhone has really become my replacement for my iPad. I'm very comfortable on a plane watching a movie on my phone. I don't really need to carry the extra device. I'm using Beats headphones. I've seen you wear AirPods, or at least what appear to be AirPods. So we are both, you have Beats as well. I'm wearing an Apple Watch, as are you. So we are very much in the Apple fan camp. But the big thing that they pushed about the new iMac was that it's available in a bunch of colors. That, to me, goes back to the 90s, the quote portable ones that look like a 13-inch television. And I had one of those. I had a light blue one. That was my computer for a very long time. What color my computer is doesn't matter to me. What I was kind of excited about is this computer is so thin that the headphone jack can't be in the back because it would stick out the other side. So it had to be in the side. And I have to admit, as someone who bought a new iMac in October, I'm actually kind of annoyed about this, but it does seem mostly cosmetic. I like my iMac, but it is a physically big device, which can sometimes cause problems. So what were you most excited about with the iMacs?
So actually, I thought the iMacs were, again, I'll take a different view. I thought the iMacs they're doing something different here. The iMacs that they launched, I would call them, so remember, I think Apple has now this thing of everything has a Pro and a non-Pro version, right? So there's an iPhone Pro, there's an iPad Pro, and there's a iMac, but there's no iMac Pro, right? So I think what they launched is the iMac for everyone. With the colors, I don't know if you noticed this or not, but one of the things I noticed is the way they were placing the iMac in their shots in the presentation. The iMac was present at weird places, like the morning bench top. It's present in the, on top of the dresser in the bedroom. So what I think they're going for here, and this is very subtle, I think what they're trying to do is they're saying, well, this is the computer for the masses. We're going to make it very colorful. It's going to add color to your rooms. and we want the back of it to be showing. One of the things cool about Apple is a design company which makes computers, right? So this is a home design item that they've designed, which has beautiful screen. People can watch TVs on it, programs on it, stream, do some work, and things like that. So I think that's what they're going for with the coloring here and with the design, design aesthetics. And of course, they put the M1 chip into it, which I think is just the starting point. Again, I think there's going to be an iMac Pro, which is going to be probably 27-inch or 30-inch. That's going to target the pro heavy-duty users, right? But this is targeting all those people who have, Windows desktops, who are waiting to transfer over to the Apple world. This was for them. That was my take, at least. And I get your point. You're annoyed with iMac. I would be too. I'm annoyed about my iPad.
Yeah, I mean, when I started here at Seven Investing, I bought, like a not cheap, like a $1,500 or $1,600 new iMac as a supplement to my relatively new MacBook Pro. I think my MacBook Pro is a 2019 as well. And actually my workhorse computer is a 2016 MacBook because it's just so much lighter. It's more comfortable sitting on my lap. It's easier to travel with. I actually kind of regret the MacBook Pro and sort of wish I'd bought a newer MacBook Air for that purpose. But okay, I understand that idea. I like the idea of the iMac as sort of a design aesthetic, that it could in theory be like, your dorm room television or whatever it might be. So I do understand that. And again, I'm not saying it isn't a fabulous computer and it isn't incrementally better. It's just that the overall group, and we're mostly going to talk about this when we get to AirTags, because you really like them. I'm really underwhelmed by them. But before we get there, let's talk about the new iPad Pro. So here's my problem with the iPad. I've had a bunch of iPads. I worked at Microsoft, so I got the original Microsoft Surface with the keyboard. And at no point have I tried to force myself to enjoy working on the Surface or working on an iPad with a keyboard. It's not a great experience. And, when I first had a Surface, that was very novel. So like people would come up to you at Starbucks back when people were allowed to come up to you and you were allowed to sit in Starbucks, and I would get, people looking, and really it's never been a great experience. And I found that with the keyboards, I have a hard time believing at the price that's not that different from a laptop that I don't see a marketplace for an iPad Pro. Why don't you start there and explain it to me?
Yeah, so I think the issue iPad in general is having is exactly what you're saying. iPad is like caught in this land where it's neither an iPhone nor a MacBook, right?
Yeah.
So it's in this no man's land. Part of the issue, I think, has been addressed with the iPad Pro is just stuff that people do on the Mac requires, for many of the users, requires heavy duty processing, and the iPad is actually not adept at that, right? I think going to the M1 is a testament saying that, okay, we are going to put this new chip in, which is our best chip, best in class desktop chip into the iPad. That's bridging the gap between the two. I think there are a few other things that potentially will happen, right? So one of the things is, what is really interesting is that if you think about the iMac design and think of the iPad design, and you actually look at the Apple's homepage, look at how the iMac actually looks like a giant iPad. It actually looks from the side, it exactly looks identical. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think the way to think about it would be the iPad should become a MacBook when it's attached to a keyboard, and it should become a handheld device when it's detached from the keyboard. But I think that transition is not happening because the apps are not there. And part of, I think, Apple's theory might be that the apps that people want to use for creative tasks, heavy-duty tasks, are actually Mac apps. They are sitting on the Intel world with the x86 architecture. Moving the Mac to an architecture that's actually identical to the iPhone or the underlying computing architecture, when I say computing, I mean the CPU, to underlying identical architecture essentially means porting of apps across the platforms easy. I think that's what they're trying to do. I think this is something that Apple has been building for 10 years. It took them 10 years to actually make the iMac chip or the Mac chip, right? But they have been building on it because they've been building the chips for the iPad and the iPhones. This actually will allow them to transition the apps and bridge this gap, right? So there are going to be people who are going to say, okay, for most purposes, my iPad Pro is fine and I don't need a Mac. For some people, the Mac is going to, so the question really in my mind right now is, what boundaries are the Mac going to push and what boundaries are the iPad going to push if they're all going to be on the same chipset with the same underlying operating system design? How the line's going to blur. That's, I think, going to be a very interesting journey. I really have no clue of where this is going, but I think this is, we are going to see probably more when Apple does its worldwide developers conference in like June or July, whenever it happens.
I think they're going to struggle with the iPad, especially the Pro, to make it more than a very niche property. Like, sure, if you're an artist, there are definitely areas where it makes sense, where keyboard functionality is an add-on that's great. Like, look, back when my Mac was a big heavy thing, or if I had a 16-inch MacBook, I could totally see for travel purposes getting an iPad and a keyboard and using it. That being said, I don't need anything more than a MacBook Air, which, the prices are just not that different. And from a tablet, I don't carry a tablet anymore, but I used to carry a tablet for entertainment purposes when I traveled. And honestly, a $60 Kindle Fire was more than enough. They're a little clunky. They lack Apple's aesthetic. And I forget why. I bought an iPad mini at some point, and when there's a storm here, I'll make sure I download some movies on it, because we'll have stuff on all our devices. So because obviously you're limited to how many charging bricks you own and how much stuff you can keep charged in the event. We have hurricanes here in West Palm Beach, but I don't know. I don't think an iPad is something I'll ever buy again. But of course, I recognize that I'm a sucker, and there's every possibility I'll buy 3 of them in the next 6 months, because I'll see one in a store and get enamored with it, and I'll spend $1,200 I don't need to. But let's talk about AirTags. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, I actually agree with you that I don't think iPad, the Pro line, is not, I think, a volume seller, right? I think it's going to be a very niche, as exactly as you said. But I mean, it's, I think, the mix that matters to Apple probably, that, 20% sales go to Pro, they make higher margins on that. That probably allows them to sell more iPads at a lower margin and things like that. But yeah, I think it's a niche product for sure. Like the Pro market is niche for sure, right? And then there are use case issues.
That Pro audience is probably the most loyal to Apple in terms of, if you're editing in Final Cut, you are not going to switch over and edit in Adobe Premiere. That is definitely an Apple loyalist. Though I still have yet to meet, and you might be the only one, you may actually use this. Do you use Pages and Numbers? Do you use the Microsoft Office knockoffs that Apple gives you for free?
Well, I use Pages regularly. I use Numbers regularly, and I use Keynotes regularly. I don't use Pages as much. I use actually Numbers is beautiful. I really like Numbers, much better than Microsoft Excel. And I find Keynote is way better than PowerPoint. But that's what Pages I don't use. I use Google Docs more than Pages, just because it's just more efficient because of the type of work we do.
And Google Docs is god awful terrible, but we all use it because it's free and it's easily available and it crosses platforms. Many of us at 7 Investing are Mac users, but many of us are not. I've heard Chromebooks come up. I've seen PCs come up. But let's talk about AirTags. So on your phone, you have Find My. This is basically a portable version of Find My. So here's what happened. I'm at Universal Studios. This was maybe 2 years ago. My son lost his phone in the Men in Black ride. This is a very violent ride. It spins you around. His phone came out at some point. I brought my phone, which I make my son turn on his tracking so I can follow him. As the parent, I would know where he is when he's getting home from school. It was mostly for bus stop purposes. But that being said, I could see where he was. So I walked to a Universal Studios employee and I showed them the Find My, and they took my phone into the bowels of the ride and they found his phone. It was really, really kind of an amazing feat of engineering. So now this allows you to put one on, say, your Mac, put it on, I don't know, your umbrella. I lose 100 umbrellas a year. It would probably be worth it to me. And I'm not saying the device isn't cool and that the Find My infrastructure isn't cool, but this has existed for a long time. We've had Tile here in the US, and I've always thought about buying it and never have. I will probably buy this because it is dumb that I have a, whatever it cost, $1,500 laptop, and if I leave it in an airport, I'm absolutely screwed. So it probably seems worth it to me to do it. But I don't know, it just wasn't that innovative to me. But you really like this one, so shoot.
Yeah, so I love this. So I mean, you have sort of Find My by default built into the Macs, right? I mean, the iPads, so you can location ping them. as long as they have battery on it. One of the advantages of the AirTag product is that the battery actually lasts a year. So you have a full year to find your stuff, which is pretty cool. Now, I think I really like this because this is what I call putting research to practice, right? So the Find My network exists because the Find My basically takes your location of your device, which is your iPhone, and basically puts it onto the cloud in a privacy-aware, privacy secure fashion without stealing your data, without making use of your data. And then that allows you to do the tracking, right? Now, what Apple is really trying to say here is that we have got 1 billion plus devices out in the wild. We can build this network that can track another 1 billion plus devices which are not actually currently, or 1 billion plus things which are not correctly connected to the internet, right? So you basically are using a Bluetooth connectivity, using their, the ultra wideband, for precision tracking, they're using the ultra wideband chip that they put on the new iPhones, right? Otherwise, you don't have that precision tracking, but you've still got location tracking using all the other items. But you're basically using Bluetooth to now build this network, right? And the cool thing is, suppose I have my keys and my keys are lost, right? And the keys are lost in some gymnasium. It's quite likely another iPhone user is going to come there. My key is going to, on the tag, is going to now ping that phone. And then it's going to use that phone to upload its location to the cloud. And then from there, I can actually discover it, right? So that is really cool. And applications for this, hundreds of applications.
Yeah, the luggage applications alone. I've never dealt with lost luggage, but if you have this and your luggage gets lost, you can, in theory, tell the airline where your luggage is, and it helps them track it down. I've heard horror stories of people show up for a 4-day long trade show. They're wearing their sweatpants and a t-shirt, and all their suits and stuff are lost, and you have to go to the mall in Las Vegas and overpay for everything. And of course, there's no tailors, and it's really a nightmare. So I do see a lot of applications. I actually think from a gonna sell a lot of them point of view, I actually think Apple's gonna sell a lot of them because there are so many implications for it. I think this becomes a bit like the Amazon Echo in that at Christmas time, Amazon will be like 6 Echoes for $100. Yeah. I think you're going to see some of those deals. Apple only does deals once a year. They do deals at Black Friday. I could see this being an add-on, get one for free. So it's not that I don't like the product. It's just that, I don't know, I thought there'd be something cooler to it. It would be smaller. It would be.
So here's the thing, right? Nobody else can do it but Apple, because nobody else has that kind of device scale, right? I mean, the thing is that you could have a third party do it, but if they don't have enough of users to ping, it's actually useless, right? So the fact that Apple has this concentrated user base, which guarantees that somebody's going to be in the gym that's going to come with an iPhone and therefore it's going to talk to it, makes it useful. You know what I think it's going to be? So Apple is exactly doing what you have predicted, right? They're bundling 4. They know that people are going to at least buy 4. So you can buy one for, I don't know what it is, $29, or you can buy 4 for 100. But basically they're saying buy 4, right? So it's going to sell it, but I think people are going to put this on their pets.
That's a good idea, actually.
I think your cat and your dog, now your cat and dog are part of your Apple ecosystem. I think this is a brilliant, ecosystem play where you're extending the people. You're never going to give an iPhone to your cat or dog, but you're going to give an AirTag to your cat or dog. So I think that's where it is.
There is zero possibility either of my cats will put up with this. So fortunately, they are indoor cats, so that is not generally an issue. But we did when we lived in Connecticut, one of our previous cats got out. Our front door popped open. And she left. And it turns out she was just hiding under our neighbor's porch. And I crawled under there and she was terrified and I got her home. But something like that would absolutely have given me unbelievable peace of mind. But getting a cat who doesn't wear a collar to wear a collar can be a challenge. So it is going to be a hit. I think, look, I might tuck one in my wallet. I am prone to losing my wallet in my car and then not realizing that's what I've done. I get out of the car, I knock it out, it's just fallen in the car. And then I go in the house and it's an hour later, oh my God, where's my wallet? And maybe I go to the car to backtrack to where I just used it and I realize, oh, it's sitting on the seat of my car. So this type of thing, I think peace of mind is very valuable and I trust Apple with this. And to give you a quick glimpse at how ubiquitous the iPhone is, I worked for Microsoft during the Windows 8 launch. There was a big push with Windows 8 to have the Windows 8 phone. phones supported by Microsoft were the Windows 8 phone and the Apple iPhone. And when I say supported, I mean Microsoft tech. Like, so you could go to like the help bar in an office and they would make sure like your Microsoft email was correct on your iPhone. So, they knew they could sort of thumb their nose at Android phones. They probably can't anymore. But they were not willing to do that because they knew too many of their people would just get an iPhone separately and then be less adept at answering their work email, or back then it was called Link. Now it's, of course, Microsoft Teams. So let's go to the last new device that they introduced, because this is literally a device. I'm going to read my notes exactly. It's a refreshed Apple TV 4K with a brand new remote. And my note was, you really have to be a fanboy to care about this. And here's why. The cheapest version of this is $179. You can get a Roku or an Amazon Fire for somewhere between $30 and $35, depending on the time of year. So you can buy 5, maybe even 6 of those for the price of this. I don't care how cool it looks. I don't care if it has slightly better bells and whistles. And I honestly have never been that impressed with the Apple, way of presenting TV. To me, you basically have like a relative who works at Apple that's going to like notice if you don't have this. Like, am I missing something? I feel like Apple has lost this game and they keep playing it.
Oh, I think that's a very, very fair comment. I think I think the Apple TV is a vanity purchase, and I think the only other I guess use case would be if you're like a complete Apple ecosystem house like ours is. Like the only Amazon thing that we've got an Amazon subscription, Prime subscription. That the only other Amazon thing we have is Amazon Echo as Amazon Eero for our Wi-Fi. But if you have an Apple TV, you can then connect your like HomePods, and you can actually get stereo sound out of left and right HomePod and things like that. You can't do that if you have a Roku or an Fire TV and so on. But yeah, I think this is a pure vanity purchase. If you want to put that Apple TV in your living room to show people that you can afford an Apple TV.
I haven't set them. I haven't set them all up, but I have an Amazon Echo for every room in my house. I just bought one that's also an alarm clock with a phone charger on the top. I have the Echo Show, which I've never used for absolutely anything, but I bought it on sale at Christmas time. I just think there's some areas where price matters, and the HomePod, the Apple TV, I tend, if I have a pick, I will get a Roku installed TV to save the HDMI port. I'll be curious. I'll probably buy an Apple TV at some point for testing purposes. And then of course, we'll then have to make it my main, the showpiece in my house. But of course, I actually have an Xbox connected to my main TV, and I actually use most of my apps through that. And for the moment, because I didn't want to pay Comcast rental on a box, I actually use a TiVo as my cable box, which is a real pain to set up with Comcast. But I actually get most of the apps on there. So, you have a lot of choices, and I'm not sure there's any reason to spend more money. But let's quickly go through one of the other things they announced. That is season 2 of Ted Lasso. And here's the thing. I know this was a popular show. As someone whose American brother now works at a high-level position in the Premier League, I've had Ted Lasso thrown at me more than you could possibly imagine. I am not a fan of this, only because it means Apple is going to continue with the vanity project that is Apple TV. And I understand this is not a lot of money for Apple, but Apple should take its couple of mildly successful shows and license them to a competitor, bring them to Paramount Plus or to Netflix or to whoever. I see 0 subscribers driven by Ted Lasso. I don't think the morning show got 1 person to subscribe to Apple TV. If you get it for free with a new device, you might use it. But these are very low viewership shows, even with tens of millions, hundreds of millions, actually, people getting free subscriptions for a year. I don't know. I want them to quote Mr. Wonderful on Shark Tank, which is a show you may not have access to. I want them to take Apple TV out back and shoot it. I am not a fan of this particular product.
Yeah, so I'm actually, I've tried to watch Ted Lasso, and I love people love it. I've found many of the other Apple shows more interesting than Ted Lasso, but that's, I think, a personal taste thing. So here's my take on Apple TV. I think Apple TV or Apple TV Plus, Apple TV is the box, and Apple TV Plus is the subscription. Apple TV Plus was never designed to be a standalone product. Apple TV Plus is basically an add-on. So it's an add-on to Apple Music, to iCloud, to iCloud storage, to all those things, right? So it's basically a bundle. So and then Fitness Plus. So basically, if you think of like we have a Premiere One subscription, right? Basically gives us everything. This is just an add-on to that, and I think there's justification to carry on to have that. I think that Apple did miss a trick to not acquire Netflix when it could. But again, here's the thing, right? The TV is actually a very expensive business, right? It's an expensive business. It's very expensive in terms of getting the shows done. You could do curated shows, and if you have 1 or 2 hits per year, that justifies having that as an add-on. As you rightly said, nobody's, I think, going to subscribe to this on their own, but it just adds a little bit of extra value to my Apple Music subscription and things like that. So, yeah, that's what it is really. It's a side project for Apple.
I feel the same way about Amazon Prime Video, and Amazon Prime Video has probably my favorite show of the past year. It has The Boys, which is a wonderful show and something I'm very excited about. But if Amazon killed Amazon Prime Video tomorrow, I wouldn't change my Amazon subscription. And if Apple got rid of Apple TV Plus, I wouldn't drop I don't remember what level. I have everything except fitness. So to me, Apple Music is something you have to have, or Spotify, or you have to have a subscription to a music service. I pay for Apple News, which is probably not a great value, only because it annoys me when I go to click on an article and for some reason I can't read it. So I'm happy enough to support journalism that way. I understand what they're doing with the bundling, but it does feel to me like a lot like Amazon just like making things up to give you. Like, I'm not sure photo storage is really like why I've signed up for Amazon Prime. And I understand that it's a rounding error, but TV isn't. TV is really expensive. When you have a show that stars Jennifer Aniston and Steve Carell, those people cost a lot of money. And I haven't seen a lot of good out of Apple TV Plus, but I think that's true out of a lot of services. Disney is batting roughly 1,000, but that's in a very narrow band of a certain type of show. Netflix, maybe by their algorithm, they're hitting 350. By my personal algorithm, they're like, I don't know, hitting like 80. Like, they strike out an awful lot, though they do have some of the best show names. I mean, how do you not turn it into at least one episode of The Floor is Lava? I think you have to at least stop by and take a look. But let's get into some of the other things Apple is trying to accomplish, so this podcast doesn't end up at being like 19 hours long. So you're picking up on the fact that Apple is building everything around privacy. Is this sort of anticipating consumer demand and trying to I hate to say stick it to Facebook and Google, but that does kind of seem like it's a very conscious, we see these companies take advantage of your data, we are not going to do that.
Yeah, so I think there is that theme. So I'd say Apple is creating this privacy plus brand for itself, right? So I think different companies position themselves differently, right? For Apple, we are the consumers, right? We are the people who pay Apple, and therefore it can afford to say that, well, we're not going to sell your data. For Google and Facebook, we are actually not the consumers. We are not the customers. Right? The customers are the ads, people who are the businesses that are placing ads. So it's it's this relationship really that So we are the free users to Google and Facebook that it monetizes via others. So I think Apple is just hitting on that and using that as a brand building exercise. I think this gives them a license to do things that other companies can't, right? So, you see that. So, I mean, we have seen that play in other areas, right? So if you take cloud computing as an example, right? If you compete with the people you're providing infrastructure services to, they are hesitant to come and give you those services. Then they go to other people. So just because Amazon has competed with a bunch of other people, Amazon is a retail player. So therefore, if Walmart wants to have its infrastructure on cloud, it is hesitant to give it to Amazon. I think the same thing is at play here in some ways, right? I mean, if you want to give your credit data to someone, you give it to Apple instead of giving it to somebody else. You'd be much more hesitant to give it to Google than to give it to Apple because you know that Google might sell it. Google probably won't, but you feel that Google might sell it to some insurance company or somebody else that could use it in some way that turns out to be malicious. Again, I don't think Google would ever do that, but that's just bias, right? And reference bias. And I think Apple is just using that to create a brand, saying like, look, we don't do that. I think there's some value to it.
I think this is also Apple recognizing that it's going to be asking you for increasingly sensitive health data over the next decade. And if you're going to tell Apple your diseases and what horrible things you have and what minor things you have and what drugs you've ingested and not ingested, I think you're going to want to 100% believe they protect your privacy. So I really do feel like this is like Apple establishing its bona fides because they're already doing some amazing work by aggregating some health data. Apple can identify things like, ooh, like where Anirban lives, there is a surprising number of this type of cancer or this type of, because they have some of your aggregate data, maybe not cancer, but, fitness things or hypertension or other things that they can tell with some of the data they get on an aggregate basis. And I could care less if Apple puts me into a cluster of men, ages 45 to 54 who live in a warm climate or whatever, however they break down that data. But I don't necessarily want to start getting like ads in the mail based on my health data. And we know the financial services industries have been dreadful with this. And so I like this. Apple values its customers. You actually feel a little bit special owning Apple products. And I think this just establishes that. Let's explain what the M1 chip is, and then talk a little bit about what it means for Apple going forward.
Okay, so we're going to go into some technicalities here, right? So basically, if you think about the Intel chip, so the first thing you want to think about is the chips are basically devices that take instructions, right? And the instructions are written in ones and zeros, so they don't understand our language. So the language that they speak is ones and zeros, and that the language, just like we speak English, the chips speak what is known as an instruction set. And every type of architecture, just like Germany has a language and US has a language, which is the American English versus the British English, there is different instruction sets for different types of architecture. So the Intel architecture is what's known as x86. Now, if you're developing something on the x86, that's going to result in an executable that basically runs on x86 architecture. Now, Apple for a long time has been using its own architecture based on ARM, right? So ARM, the ARM open source to design and or licensed design, I should say, and it's using that to build its processors for the iOS, which is the iPad OS and the iOS, so the iPhones and iPads. That's an ARM, and the Mac has been on Intel, the x86, which has meant that there's a disparity between the types of apps that you have on the Mac and the types of app that you have on the mobile devices and the smart and the tablets, right? Now, to bridge that gap, what you really want is the same architecture across all of them. That's what they're basically trying to do by basically saying, well, we're going to use the M1. They're calling it the M1 chip, but the M1 chip is basically an extension of the A series in that. The M1 is basically an A series extension with more GPUs, the graphics processing units, and signal processing and everything put together. It's a system on chip. You put all these other chips in one place, create efficiency, but you change the architecture to ARM. That makes actually porting applications across the platform really easy. If you write something for the Mac, you can actually port it to the iOS very easily. If you write something for the iOS, you can port it back this way. That is, I think, the bigger play. The bigger play is to integrate the experience across this to create a bigger ecosystem. There are some other benefits that are going to come just because of the design, right? Because they're now putting everything in one chip. So the system on chip, it allows for, better user memory, right? So you're not like writing things out from the CPU to some other place and then copying it from there to the GPU. You're not swapping. So an 8 GB memory, random access memory, or the RAM, as we say for an Intel, is not the same thing as an 8 GB on the M1.
Does this also give Apple significantly more control over the device experience? Because previously they could tell Intel, hey, here's what we're looking for, but they weren't really in those rooms. And basically Apple can now tell its chip designers, hey, 5 years from now, we envision that your iPad is going to snap into a robot and be able to walk up the stairs. And we needed to process that type of functionality. It feels like there's some pretty big advantages to having that roadmap.
And absolutely. So it's a simple example that you'd see is that you could have the you could have the same camera on an iPad and a Mac. But the Mac on Intel might look, with the same camera, same hardware, will look inferior. And that's because just of the way the chips are working, right? The chips inside in the iPad are able to actually better process the data than the Mac. And exactly that, if you are using third-party chips, you basically are relying on their roadmap, right? And then you rely on their roadmap to design your product roadmap. In this case, you bring beautiful hardware software integration, which allows you to actually imagine how the device is going to look based on how you think the hardware is going to evolve. So I think this is it's a very customized approach. And again, the very fact that Apple sells hundreds of millions of devices allows them to do it. This is very hard for other people to do because you just don't have the scale. So again, Apple is basically saying, well, I've got a scale advantage and I'm going to really exploit my scale advantage. And this is a perfect example of how Intel, basically the boss of chips, is being disrupted by Apple. Apple effectively is the biggest chip maker now in the world. If you think about it, they don't make the chips. Somebody else, is making the chips for them, but they're the biggest chip designer in the world in that sense, right? And then Apple could push in multiple different ways. If Apple wanted, it could actually push into NVIDIA's territory and say, well, we're going to design GPUs that are going to go into data centers if it wanted to. The question really is, does it want, right? We don't know.
So I'm going to close with an investing question. I'm going to answer it first, at least my opinion on it. There's no definitive answer here. But Apple is, I think, still the largest company, publicly traded company, over $1 trillion. The question is, in the next decade, do you believe they can get to $2 trillion? And I am going to say the challenge for Apple is they can put out something like the Apple Watch, which if this was a startup company, would be a massively successful company. We'd be talking about Blapple Watch or whatever you call it. If it wasn't an Apple product, we'd be talking about it like Roku. We'd be talking about it like we did Fitbit for years, or GoPro. And obviously those companies have stumbled and Fitbit is now part of Google, but it would certainly be an oh my God success story. And inside Apple, it's basically like they found some change in the couch. But if you view the Apple Watch as part of a much bigger healthcare roadmap, I think they get to $2 trillion. I think there is every possibility that Apple, and I think Amazon and Google have a chance at this as well. I think Apple might be an integral part of your healthcare picture going forward. And that will partially be through monitoring. It will partially be through some sort of telemedicine. It wouldn't shock me if they made an acquisition, one of those like Apple acquisitions that you only read about on GeekWire, where it's like they bought some company for $30 million, get rid of its product, but absorb its 32 employees. I think that is where Apple is going. And I would bet, and I guess we can reconvene in 10 years if you don't agree with me on this, but I actually think Apple will double in size. It just might not be it's in fact not going to be by coming up with some amazing new device that we haven't thought of.
So I disagree with you on the quantum maybe. I think Apple could be a $3 trillion company in 10 years. Here's I think what I think is instructive, right? The instructive thing is if you look at last 10 years, and I had a tweet out about this, over the last 10 years, Apple generated over $600 billion of free cash flow, 600 billion, okay? The closest Google is about 200 billion. If you think about their market caps, they're very similar. Apple was hugely undervalued. If you assume that Google is correctly valued today and Apple is correctly valued today, then there was a huge undervaluation going on given the amount of free cash flow. Amazon in that frame has generated only $95 billion of free cash flow. Here's what free cash flow does for you. Apple has decreased its share count by 32% in a decade. So I think Apple actually probably doesn't even have to be 3x from here, Apple or 1.5x from here. Apple could still deliver astounding returns for you just because it's buying back shares like crazy. And it can do that because every little thing that it brings into the system just adds extra cash into the pot. So as long as it can generate cash, I think Apple is going to be a fantastic investment. That's how I look at it, instead of thinking about which is going to be about being the bigger company. But yeah, I think 3 trillion is not out of the way, largely because again, the trillion plays on our mind. It seems like, oh, it's too big. But the market keeps going up, right? The market has been going up for the last 100 years, right? What was the average company 10 years ago was like a 30 years ago was like a $7 billion company. Today it's like a $70 billion. That's a 10x. So the average company size is going up. And as we print more money, the average company size has to go up, right? What else happens?
And Apple does have the ability to make acquisitions that other companies can't even imagine. Like, so if Apple was to buy Teladoc, it wouldn't be that big a deal. I don't have Teladoc's market cap in front of me, but they could do it. Most companies would have to do that as a merger. Apple could buy, and I really thought this might happen. Apple could buy Nintendo, and the reason I thought that might happen is when the Wii U failed. Nintendo was sitting on all this amazing intellectual property and really had no device for it. So imagine if Apple exclusively owned Super Mario and Donkey Kong and all. That's something Apple doesn't really have a lot of is intellectual property. So I'm not saying these things are going to happen. In fact, I'm famously wrong predicting things like that. I've long predicted that Amazon would buy things that it hasn't bought. But that being said, Apple's ability to stumble and then just cover it up with money by buying something else that's successful is unparalleled. And we're seeing this with Microsoft. Microsoft has gone on, a $10-12 billion each acquisition streak. And it looks like they're not going to buy Discord, but they've bought lots of different things. And they bought Nuance for $18 billion a few weeks back. So we are going to see more of this. Anirban, we have talked for far too long. Thank you for joining me on the 7 Investing Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.